record.
That's the custodian's shot.
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm not part of the group. I'm here by invitation.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
You're now part of the group.
You are part of the group. You're very welcome. Where are you from, Francine?
Well, originally I'm from France, but I live near Southport.
Oh, right.
And that's how I know Kirk Harrison.
Right.
We used to share an apiary, and now he's moved north, but we're still in touch. So he's invited me to join you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Francine.
Good
Hello,
evening.
Kirk.
You're a bit in the dark there, Kirk.
I just thought that. I don't know why. I'll have a look. That's a bit strange.
If you've got the wrong lighting, you need a torch. Got some spooky underlighting.
Don't joke.
Don't just
I've
have
had
a torch for fun.
I put a torch in my conservatory to get a bit of light on.
Yeah. That, I was saying to Katie before I let most of you in, actually, the nights are getting darker earlier and it's a bit grim.
Diane, can you hear me?
I can just about, Paul. You're a little bit quiet.
I'm always quiet. Just on about those wasps.
Yeah.
We held the council on the green outside our place with the ride-on lawnmower on Thursday. They ran over a wasp's nest. They just came out and there was just a massive cloud of them, and one of my neighbours got stung 15 times.
Oh, no.
So, and the driver jumped off his tractor, left that running, and started running out saying, "Has anybody got any ant powder?" And I said, "Those aren't ants." But apparently it kills wasps.
Yeah, it probably will. It'll do something to the shell, won't it? So the exoskeleton.
So there are still plenty around here. There's a massive nest out there.
Yeah, as long as they're not bothering the bees, we're not bothered about wasps that much. So anyway, I have got a PowerPoint for us tonight. I really resisted the temptation to put a funny picture on this front page, but I will share that. Drugs for bees, and I did a Google, and there were some terrible pictures of. I mean, they just weren't nice. So I thought I would leave it plain. But this is about bee medicines. And we're going to start off. I'm going to show you the VMD site, which is the Veterinary Medicines Directorate. And this lists the only chemicals that you're supposed to put in your hive. The only drugs bees can have are on this list. So I did try and record a video of me using the site, and after 3 attempts I gave up, so I thought we'd play with it live. So the URL is quite easy to find. If you type VMD database in, you should get a link for it, but I will post a link later on so that you can all have a play at this. So you click the Start Now button, and we want to do a search. We scroll down and click on the search. And we only want to know about drugs for bees. So we're going to find bees in this drop-down box, the species box. And if you have other pets, it's actually really interesting because you can find out what drugs you're allowed to give things like your guinea fowl or your hawks, or your owls, or all these other things most of us don't have. But if you have cats and dogs, they're in there as well. There's some farm animals, and we keep going down. We get to the other category, and there's badgers. Now, I don't know anyone with a pet badger, but I do know people with pet bees. So we click the bees, and then we have to just click back on the main bit, and we click the Run Search button. And what this then produces is a really up-to-date list of all the drugs that you can give your bees, and you can cut and paste this. And what I've done is I've copied the important document links out, and I will save those for you. But they are sorted alphabetical in this form. You can play around with it, and it tells you the company that makes it, what its veterinary medicine number is, the date it was added to the list, what the active substance is, what the target species is. Now we've asked it to only find bees, so that's that. And then it's some other bits with lots of documents that you can go and read if you want. But this list has got lots of very odd things in that you may not have heard of. But that's the only things you can give your bees to treat them for any disease. That there is something that the bee inspector can treat them with for foul brood, but that isn't licensed for anyone other than bee inspectors to use. So that's not on this list. So I will go back to my PowerPoint now. So the list starts off with, I think it's actually something else, but Varroa was the first one I've included here. And this has got flumethrin in, and these are plastic strips that you hang in the hive, and the dose is 4 strips, and you put it in late summer after the honey harvest for a maximum of 6 weeks. And that's a picture of it in use, and that's a picture of the box. These are mostly available across a range of suppliers. I don't think there's one supplier that has them all.
And these are all for Varroa?
They're all for Varroa. That is the only thing you can buy treatments for bees. As I said, there's an antibiotic that the bee inspector can administer for European foul brood, but you can't buy that, and you would get massively in trouble if you got hold of some and gave it your bees, because that isn't what happens for foul brood. And there is actually a beekeeper in Scotland, a bee farmer, who got into trouble for giving his bees this antibiotic because he found they had foul brood, and rather than wait for the bee inspector to get there, he went ahead and treated them, and he did get fined because that's not the process for doing it. Oh, Steve's just joined the meeting, so the waiting room's not bumping up quite as much as it should, I don't think, tonight. So anyway, that's one you may or may not have used. It's one of these strips that hangs down. Apistan has something called tau fluvalinate in, and again, this isn't one to use during the honey flow. No, I will just stop sharing and mute everyone. Sorry, I can't work out. Oh, that's Steve. Hello, Steve. Right, we'll go back to sharing. I can't see the chat room mute all button whilst I'm actually in the slideshow. So anyway, this is some polymer strips again, which are a bit plasticky, and they hang in the hive as well. Definitely not with honey on, but this one has got some warnings about it being lipophilic, which means it can build up in the wax. And so the warnings on this is to avoid it accumulating too much in the wax. It wants you to replace with new foundation on a regular basis, and not to recycle this wax as foundation in brood or honey frames. And when I read that, I thought that's quite interesting, because I do know people who use Apistan. And I thought we'll have to look at that in more detail in the document. So I have that open. So we will just get to that and share that and have a look at that. This document is the same as is available for all the other ones, and all it is a Word document with lots of information in about the name of it, and it follows a set pattern of stuff. So this is it kills Varroa, but this one is a drug that can cause resistance because it's not an organic acid, it's actually a chemical, one of the pyrethroids that we know there are problems with across the country where the Varroa have got resistant because beekeepers aren't very good at following the instructions. So on this sort of treatment, there's always more things to pay attention to. And one of the things they quite often say is alternate the use. So don't use this one every time you want to treat for Varroa. And as you can't use it with honey, it means it's an end of season autumn treatment. I think you'd be foolish to use them in spring because there's always a chance in spring your colony will bring a honey surplus in. And you don't want them to be collecting a crop that you can't take or would be contaminated for you taking later in the year. Now, this is the bit where it's saying about replacing the frames with new foundation to avoid the accumulation of the residues. And that sort of made me think about, if you use this and you melt your wax down and trade it in, what do the bee companies who turn it into foundation do to make sure it's not in there? Do they test? And I thought that was an interesting thing. And maybe if you do use this one, you melt your brood combs down. I know you don't get a huge amount of wax anyway, but maybe that's the wax to use for something that is actually coming out of the bee chain, so it's not being put back into brood combs. But I did wonder how many people read this. I love this bit. In all of these things, there is use during pregnancy, lactation or lay, and it always says not applicable because bees don't get pregnant. So that sort of made me smile. But it has all the details of the administration of the treatments in. And this is one that you keep in for at least 6 weeks, but not more than 8 weeks. And it's the reason they developed resistance in the past is beekeepers have left it in too long, and the amount that gets exuded by the strips after the 8 weeks will be such a minute amount the Varroa develop a resistance to it because they're being persistently exposed to it. And it just reinforces the do not place in the honey supers. This is one of the few that says small and wintering nukes require 1 strip only. So if you were desperate to treat a nuke, then this is one of the things you can use. But there's lots of stuff in there, and then it goes into how you store it and then what you do with it after. And not surprisingly, this is something you shouldn't throw about after you've got to dispose of it properly, because it's extremely dangerous to other things because of it being quite a serious chemical. But anyway, you can read these for all of them, and somewhere in there should be the instructions. Here it is. Can cause skin and eye irritation. Avoid contact with skin, mouth and eyes. Wear gloves when handling the strips. Wash your hands after. We've heard that quite a lot this year, so we should all be doing that anyway. But as you'd expect when you're handling chemicals, wash your hands after. And don't smoke, drink or eat whilst you're adding it to the hive, which I think sounds fairly logical. We will go back to the PowerPoint there. So this was one that caught my eye, this apistand, because of this it building up in wax thing. So not with honey again, as we'd expect, because it sounds fairly nasty. So Apiguard gel, this might be one you've used this autumn. The main ingredient in this is thymol, and it's a gel, and I'd say it was more sort of a white looking gel and sort of almost a bit like icing sugar. That's a bit runny sometimes. If you've mixed up icing to drizzle over a cake, it's sort of a bit more solid than that, but that's the sort of look of it. And it comes in these little foil trays that you peel the top back. And again, you don't use during the honey flow, because it's got thymol in it. And if you know what thymol smells like, you definitely not want that in your honey. The daily temperature shouldn't be above 40 degrees because the fumes created at high temperatures will just overwhelm the colony. But it's not as effective below 15 degrees. So you want it probably right at the end of August, putting it on then, and you do two-week treatments. And if they haven't moved everything out of the first tray, you do leave that in and put the second one in. You don't leave it an extra half a week. But the instructions for this say a maximum of 2 treatments a year. So I'm not quite sure when else you'd use it because you don't put it on with honey, so it's not a spring one. But it's quite an effective treatment in autumn. But you will know your hives have got it on because it will have quite a distinctive smell. And I think you definitely want to wash your hands after you've put that one on anyway. I don't think you'd need instructions telling you to do that. But that's one you've probably used. AP Life Bar Beehive Strips. These have a right mixture of essential oils in. There's thymol, eucalyptus oil, camphor, and a form of menthol. And it's a green spongy substance. That's I wouldn't call it spongy. It's a bit more brittle than sponge. And again, you don't use this during the honey flow because it is going to make your honey taste really funny. And again, it's got a maximum daytime temperature above which you shouldn't be using it. So it's definitely not for summer. But this is 1 strip every 7 days for each beehive, and a complete treatment is 4 strips for each hive. So that's actually 4 weeks of treatment, but you have the inconvenience of having to go in every week and add an extra strip. And it says this treatment's for once a year only. Which is fair enough. I think anything that uses essential oils, even if they said twice a year, when are you actually going to use it? But I do know people who use this, and it does have quite a strong smell again.
It's more like a Kendall mint cake texture. It's definitely not spongy. It's more like a
it's sort of like a brittly, not an oaty biscuit, but a more of a
and it's and it smells identical to some sports massage stuff I've got, which has got the same active ingredients. Funnily enough, I was sat in the gym thinking, why can I smell AP Life Bar? And I was like, it's my arm.
Yeah, you're right, aren't you? They're very warming if you get them on your skin, aren't you? These particular oils, and I imagine they're in. I've got a little tub of, it's not Tiger Balm, but it's something like that, and it smells absolutely incredible. But when you've rubbed it into your elbow, your fingers absolutely reek of it, and it's really hard to get that smell off.
It smells identical to that because it's got eucalyptus, camphor, and leather menthol thingy stuff in it.
Yeah. But I mean, that it's not unpleasant, but you really shouldn't have honey tasting of all that, should you? Well, maybe you should. No, you definitely.
There'll be warm bees.
Yes.
They won't have any muscle problems.
No. So the next one is Thymovar, and this is a thymol one. I think the name gives that away. But this one's instructions gives you ideas of where to place it. And I think it actually said, don't use it in a double brood. One of these did, and I just thought, well, you've shown me a multiple story 2-chamber box. Where did you want me to put it? But you know, if this is one you want to use, you would thoroughly read the instructions. But this is a spongy cloth, and again, you don't use it during the honey flow. And again, not over 30 degrees. So you start to get an idea of the ones with these essential oils in have to be used not in the middle of summer and not with honey on. So this is one that needs your open floors to be shut, and take your first lot out after 3 or 4 weeks and put a second lot in. So it's actually quite a long treatment. Potentially it's 8 weeks of treatment. And it says don't use more than twice a year. Well, I'd struggle to find temperatures that I wanted to go in my beehive outside of sort of September anyway, when they weren't bringing lots of honey in. So this is one I've not used. I assume it smells very much like the other thymol related ones though. Max. Now this is one that some of you might be familiar with. This is a bit squidgy sometimes. I've had them where they've been a lot squidgier than others, where they're in a cellophane inside a box, and you open the cellophane and then it's wrapped up in a tissue, and that will sometimes peel off with the cellophane wrapping, but you're supposed to keep it all intact. And then when they've been used, they do go very dry. And if you leave it in longer, because this is something that after 7 days, it has absolutely no effect in the hive because it's all dried out. The bees do chew it up a bit and try and get rid of it. So if you go in a bit late, sort of 10 days after, they may be nibbling the paper edges of it. But this contains formic acid. You need a full width entrance and open mesh floor for this, but you can put it on with honey. Its temperature thing is don't put it on if it's going to be really, really hot on the day of application. As long as it's not going to be scalding hot that day, you can put it on, and it doesn't matter if after 3 or 4 days it's going to be scorchio. This is brilliant because you can use it with honey. So if you discover sort of any time from spring onwards your bees have a Varroa problem and you've got a super on, you can treat them with this and it's not going to affect that honey at all. So that's why this is really, really useful as a treatment. And it's only a 7-day treatment, so that also makes it quite useful because it'll fit in nicely with you checking your bees every week. But there were concerns when it first came out that people lost queens because of it, and I suspect some of it is they've either not had the entrance fully open, or maybe they've left their Varroa board in. And again, it all comes down to reading the instructions. They all come within the instruction leaflet. The instructions are all available to read online. So this is one of the most useful ones, I think. When you dispose of this one, it does say in the instructions you can throw it on your compost bin. And so that's generally what I do. It goes in my smoker bucket when I take them off, and then they just get launched into the compost bin when I walk past that. They come in a really useful size bucket as well. If you haven't got anything to wash your hive tool in, and you know someone who's used Max, then ask if they've got a spare bucket, because it's a really nice size bucket for putting washing soda and washing your hive tool in. If you buy the smaller packet of it, it comes in a bigger box but flatter, and that's quite a nice box, although I've no idea what you could use it for. I couldn't bear to throw it out, but I sort of like containers and things because I always think they'll come in useful for something. But this is one, it will take your breath away if you breathe it in. It's a bit intense.
Is it just one strip?
Yeah, it's one, is it?
It's 2 strips per
Two,
colony.
yeah, per colony. And
I don't think you can feed whilst you're doing this treatment.
No, I suspect you shouldn't feed with any of the treatments.
Yeah.
So it's good to use in a flow.
Yeah, but if they've got a super on, you don't have to take it off or worry about it being in the honey. But yeah, there's 2, and you place it at different bits of the brood box. But the temperature thing is on the day of application, so you can look at your forecast ahead and say, oh, it's going to be nice on Saturday, but if I put it on Wednesday, it'll be absolutely fine. And it is nice because it's quite a quick treatment in sort of the grand scheme of, you know, the idea of an 8-week treatment is just quite long.
Can you use that one more than once a year then? Because a lot of the others have just said once a year, haven't they?
I will have a quick squiz through the leaflet, or we can all have a quick squiz through.
Because that sounds quite a useful one to have. If you get a box and it's going to last 12 months, 18 months or something like that on the best before date.
It's one that says don't use on smaller colonies. it's saying about 6 frames there, because there might not be enough volume of space if you put it on in a nuke, perhaps. This is one of the ones where it actually says natural birth and death rate is 1 to 2,000 bees per day in spring and summer. And so if you see a lot of dead bees when you put a treatment on, it's possibly because they've died in the hive rather than out in the field. And it will look quite distressing if you get a lot of dead bees in the hive, because they'll throw them all out and it'll look really, really shocking. Yeah, there's it. Do not feed, don't feed them. And some of them are just, that's the way you display them on the hive. If they all did a sort of temperature thing like that, I would have cut and pasted them all into the thing, but so few of them do. I don't think it says how many times per year, but there, it's not lipophilic, so it doesn't leave residues in the comb, which is good. No, I don't think it says it in there how many times a year you can use it. It might be.
It said 12 months, didn't it?
Was it?
Did it?
I think it said 12 months shelf life.
Oh,
so if you get it, if you get it at the right time of the year, you can probably use it a couple of times, kind of.
And this is it. It almost needs somebody to harass the manufacturers of them all to say, can I use this one more than once, because we'd quite like to know. But that's one of the good ones to have on standby for emergency treatments. So the next one is Varroa Med, which is a brown liquid that contains both formic acid and oxalic acid. It does look a bit bleh. One of the things it says in the instructions is make sure they have sufficient access to drinking water. So this is something we always need to think about anyway. Do your bees have somewhere they can go and have a drink without bothering the neighbours? This is again not with honey, and part of that is the oxalic acid. We don't want that going into our honey. But you can repeat this one every 6 days up to 5 times in autumn. I think actually you can use it other times of the year less. So in spring, I think you can use it twice. In summer, might be 2 or 3 times as well. But there are temperature limitations, and you don't use this one with honey. So I think it's more of an autumn treatment rather than a summer one. But it would be something you could perhaps put on a swarm if you wanted to treat them. There's a couple we've talked about in the past you can add to a swarm. But you trickle it on and you put an amount on per seam of bees. So between 2 frames, when that's thick with bees, we call that a seam of bees. This is one I have had no use of. I've not ever used this one. But it strikes me as this will have quite a limited shelf life because it's made up ready for you. And it once you've opened it, I imagine it's got a bit of a reasonable short shelf life on. But if there was more doses in there than you needed, perhaps find a local beekeeper and you use half the bottle and they use half the bottle. But that one I can't tell you very much more about because I've not used it. I assume it won't smell and it won't be particularly dangerous to apply other than you spilling it on yourself or maybe squirting it in your face as you're deciding you're trying to undo the lid and messing about with it. So the next one you might have heard of, apibioxol. This is an oxalic acid based one. It's a powder when you buy it. You buy it in a sachet and you make it up into a syrup or use it with a vaporizer. You use it not with honey again because we don't want oxalic acid in our honey. And if you vape with it, you can use it once a year, or if you trickle with it, you can use it twice. And ideally, with minimal brood, it will have maximum effect because it can't get through the casings on the cells. So if you think about the times of the year when you have minimal brood, that will be the middle of winter, so perhaps Christmas time, which I think is the traditional time to do it. And when you have a swarm, if you've caught a swarm, or your bees have, you've done an artificial swarm, and one of them's got the queen and all the flying bees, but no brood to speak of really, then that would be a good opportunity to use this in a trickle treatment. And like the previous one, you could use that then. And it'll work really well because the Varroa will all be on the bees, and they'll be hopefully all killed by contact with it. There's all sorts of different syringe gadgets you can buy to apply it by the seam, and I think it's 5 ml of sugar syrup per seam of bees, and you can either buy a big syringe and squirt 5 ml out, or you can use a whole load of little children's medicine syringes, and you could load up enough for a whole hive and have them on a little tray and open your hive up and use one at a time across one per seam.
Sorry, Diane, is that 5 ml diluted with sugar syrup or 5 ml neat?
It will be when you've made it up into syrup as per the instructions. They tell you how many grams of syrup to make up, how much sugar and water to add this much powder to. And the instructions are for the whole packet to be made up at once, and I think the packet's enough for 10 hives. But if you've not got 10 hives yourself, again, if you make it up and you give the rest of it that you're not going to use to another beekeeper, then it means it's not going to get wasted and tip down the drains or anything. If you vape, you need a really good quality mask, one with proper filters in that will stop organic acids coming through, because you really don't want to breathe it in because it will damage your lungs. Trickling it is much safer, but you will be a lot slower doing it because you have to do this 5 ml per seam. And that's why I think some people prefer to vaporize, because you can do that without disturbing the colony anywhere near as much.
Yeah. Those vaporizers,
yeah,
they're all they do, you put some of the powder into the end of it, plug it in, and it eats up and vapors it, yeah?
Yeah.
What's the difference between the £20 ones and the £200 ones?
About £180.
Thank you.
That I don't know. There are some very expensive vaporizing bits of equipment about, and I'm not quite sure what the difference is, but the cheap one works absolutely fine.
Thank you.
There is a man who at Oldham Beekeepers showed us this really. He was a bit of a builder bloke, so he built this thing out of plumbing stuff, and it's a bit of copper pipe, and I can't think how it worked now. He put an eek on top of the box, of the brood box, and into that he had a bit of copper pipe, and he put the powder in and then applied a blow lamp to it. That heated the copper up, which made the powder vaporize, and then that gas was pushed into the hive and it dispersed through the hive and it would drift out the bottom, and that's how you'd know it had all done. But that was to save him 30 quid or whatever a cheap vaporizer is.
Where do you get the cheap vaporizers from? I haven't seen them. I've only seen them. They're like 250 quid.
I think Thorns actually have a reasonably cheap one, but if you look
Simon the Beekeeper did as well this week.
Yeah, I've seen one definitely very cheap somewhere.
Yeah, that one in the picture was on Simon the Beekeepers, and it was only £20 odd, I think.
Right, well that's
or there's some gas bat thing for £200.
Yeah, that's the picture off the Thorns website, because that's where I grabbed the picture of the syringe from as well. So if it looks just like that, it will be the cheap version,
the standard one.
The standard one, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
But if you're really into bits of plumbing and stuff and a bit of adventurer, you could probably make this plumbing system that he did, and it's just having a piece of metal that you can heat up with this stuff in that forces it into the hive. But that struck me as actually quite a lot more work than it needed to be, because you have to put this econ to get the gas in, whereas that it goes into the entrance. I did read somebody put it in their hive and then it came out with the queen stuck to it, which would have been a bit depressing, I think. The idea of using it on a swarm is probably a good idea, because it will give that swarm an absolute brilliant start.
So Thorns do an adapter eek. I don't know if anyone's seen it, and you can put one of these in basically where the crown board is really.
Yeah.
Which is quite handy.
If I can type right, Thorn adapter eek, is it called?
Yeah, it's got multiple uses, different types of board and that you can put in at different levels. And there's a little notch for things like the vaporizer.
Right, there, that's the
one.
Adapter eek, so you can put your vaporizer in. That's for your Varroa thing, which is your vaporizer.
Surprise, surprise, they haven't had the Perspex screens all season, possibly because of short supply.
Oh, of Perspex because of COVID, perhaps.
Or whatever it's made out of. Yeah. I think they've taken off the site, or they had done last time I checked.
But you can use that for your treatments and things as well. But you could, if you can bang 4 nails into a bit of wood, you could probably make one of those yourself. It is a fairly simple thing. And how much do they? £31.
Yeah.
I mean, this is it. If you can
good idea.
Put nails in a bit of wood, you could make one of those yourself really easily.
You could buy one of their cheap super things for £12 and just chop the super in half.
Yeah. There's loads of options rather than spending 31 quid on it. So anyway, that's apibioxal. And again, like the one before, Varroa Med, you could use that one on a swarm, which would start that swarm off really well. So Apitraz, this is interestingly enough, a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which is actually a drug thing that humans can take. So this comes with the warning that if you are on one of these, they call them MOIs. I can't think what any of them are actually called. But if you're on one of those, you should be really, really careful when you're using this, because it could make you quite ill. Presumably, you could accidentally overdose yourself on it. But this is a plastic strip with some tabs in a folding line and things. You use 2 strips per hive. You remove after 6 weeks. Again, not with honey. You need low brood levels in this, so it's definitely an autumn one. But not during the winter cluster. So I don't know why people would think about opening the hive up desperately to be sticking things in it and disturbing the cluster in winter. But I suppose we have just talked about drizzling sugar syrup over them with apibioxal in. That feels a lot more invasive, putting a strip in and poking the bees. But this is one that can create resistance if used wrongly. And again, it says about don't use the brood frames as honey frames. So this is something that you want to definitely, as with all of them, write it in your medicine notes, but maybe make a note, perhaps change the brood frames after this one. So in the spring, after you've treated them in the autumn with this, maybe do a Bailey comb change and melt down your old combs and get rid of them. But yeah, it can create resistance, presumably if you leave it on for too long. But as it can't be used with honey, it's not hugely useful. I have absolutely no experience of this one. Has anyone used this? No. So the next one is Polyvar, and this is a pyrethroid again with flumethrin in. It is yellow plastic strips with lots of holes in, and you use it for at least 9 weeks, but not longer than 4 months. So that's a huge length of time, not with honey. And you need the bees to be flying because you're effectively using Meccano bits of plastic to make an entrance gate that the bees come in and out of, and they are exposed to the active substance by touching this gate. And then once they've touched it, the other bees they touch in the hive will receive some of this chemical. It's not one I've seen in use. The only diagram I have is took from their instructions, but according to what entrance size you have, you can play with the system and get it over your entrance. I assume it sort of takes the same sort of look as a mouse guard, but with yellow plastic. I've no experience of this one again, but that's quite a long treatment, I think. At least 9 weeks. Even if you start it that at the start of September, it's going to be the first week in November when you're going to pull it off and put your mouse guard on. But if it does the same job as a mouse guard and keeps the mice out, but it does need the bees to be flying. So if you had some really cold weather in October and the bees stayed in for a week or so, then they wouldn't be getting the full benefit of that exposure of coming in and out daily. So maybe that's for areas with better weather than Oldham, perhaps. So the next one is Oxuvar. This is an oxalic acid one again. You can spray it or trickle it on, and it's 1 treatment per year. Don't use with honey on because it's got oxalic acid in, and it comes as a clear, colourless concentrate for solution. So I assume you actually dilute it with sugar. Ideally in a broodless colony in the autumn, with a temperature between 5 degrees C and -15 degrees C, which strikes me as, you know, proper winter rather than autumn. And you can spray it on in summer. So if you had a swarm, you could treat it with this, spraying it on. It does sound quite a lot of faffing about. And again, you have to be careful you don't overdose the bees on it because it can really damage the bees. And it even says about queen losses there. So follow the instructions, use the right dose for the amount of bees, and probably get quite stressed about using that one, I think. And anything where you have to measure things out yourself rather than having a portion controlled version of it is a little bit more stressful, I think. So the next one is Oxy-B powder and solution. Again, an oxalic acid one. Use it once in brood-free colonies. So you could use this one on a swarm again or in the middle of winter. But if you use it in winter, it's got to be at least 3 degrees C. Not with honey, but then in the middle of winter, you're not going to have honey. And the problem is in winter, if it's not too cold, you might have brood all winter. This is one you mix into a container, you get it warm, and then you squirt it on your bees. Not one I've used, but it comes as, it says a solution or a powder, so I don't know whether you've got an option there, whether that's a sachet of powder and then that's a bottle of solution. I would assume the postage is the same on everything because nobody does free postage on that sort of thing anyway. Or I think most of the bee suppliers charge you postage on your treatments, and some of that is because some of them are actually quite heavy. So anyway, the next one is Apivar, which is Amitraz, which is the monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which you have to be careful with. And these are little strips with a V shape and a hole, so you get them between the frames. 2 strips per hive. Don't use in double brood. 6 weeks if there's no brood, and 10 weeks if there is brood. And that'll be because it'll give the bees that are inside sealed brood chance to hatch out, and the Varroa on them will get exposed to it and treated again. And again, do not recycle brood frames as honey frames. But this sort of ties in with a really good practice of changing your brood combs every 3 years. And if you think about varying the treatments you use, if you use this one, the spring after, think about a Bailey comb change. The 10 weeks thing's quite a long treatment because there's almost certainly going to be brood unless you're using it in the depths of winter. But that's that one. And this one is the one, I don't remember whether you were here last week and heard me saying there was a whirlybird one. And the word I was actually looking for is that German thing there, which I think means bee world or something, I don't know. But this is a powder in solution, and it looks remarkably like the previous instructions where you add it to a bottle, you warm it up. And again, use it once in brood-free colonies. It's oxalic acid though, rather than the previous one was oxalic acid, that one. But I think that's probably actually the same thing with a slightly different label on it. But not with honey, and there are temperature limitations on this one as well. But using it once in brood-free colonies, these are the ones to think about if you have a swarm and you'd like to make sure that swarm has a really good start. So, as I've said already at least once, some of these chemicals are really not very good for you. They can cause skin and eye problems. They'll melt your eyeballs. Your skin will fall off. And even if it doesn't, treat these things as if they are really bad for you and don't get them on your skin. If it says wear goggles, wear goggles. If it says wear a respirator, wear a respirator. You only get 1 pair of lungs. And if you want a new pair, there's quite a long wait. So avoid damaging your lungs. Give the bees the right dose. And that's probably one of the most important things, because damaging your lungs is one thing, but killing your bees is quite another, isn't it? You don't really want to do either though. If you do get it on you, then wash your hands and face or wherever you've got it quite quickly. If you're a cautious person, you would take a bottle of water down to the apiary with you so you could wash it off quickly. Dispose the containers properly. If it says be careful with it when you've finished with it, then please be careful with it. And always read the instructions. Just because you think you've remembered the instructions right from when you glanced at them 2 weeks earlier, have a quick read through, underline the important bits and follow them properly. The things to think about before you use any of them is, have you counted your Varroa? How do you know your treatment's worked? And one of the things you can do with that is you can do an alcohol wash or a sugar wash with bees, and you take a sample and you shake the bees, and if they're in alcohol then they die, but the Varroa comes off them, and you count the Varroa, and hopefully it'll be not very many. If you do it with sugar, the bees can get away afterwards, but you have given them a serious shake with sugar, so they might not be in a very good mood. Only use one of the treatments at a time. Don't keep using them. If you don't think a treatment's worked, work out why you think it's not worked. Have they still got a really big Varroa load? Can you see lots of Varroa on them properly? Try and work out why your treatment didn't work. Is it because the treatment was out of date? Was it because you didn't follow the instructions right? Did you miss some really important point with it? And one of the things that quite often happens is if you've got 4, 5 or 6 hives in one apiary, you only treat 4 of them. The Varroa in the other 2 can quickly hop across to your other colonies because the drones will go between them all. So always treat all of them in the same apiary. I think quite a lot of the instruction sheets do actually say that anyway. And then record it on your medicine sheet. There's a legal obligation to keep a medicine sheet for 6 years for your bees. So that's something to really think about. But read the instructions, and I can't emphasize that enough. Know what you're supposed to be doing before you go to the apiary. Don't get halfway through treating your apiary and go, oh, have I done this right? Because then you'll have to go and disturb all the others if you think you haven't. So make sure you've got it in mind what you're going to be doing. There are drug-free solutions. If you don't want to treat your bees, there are techniques you can use. And these are biotechnical options. And these exploit the fact that Varroa mites can only reproduce in sealed brood. And when the colony is broodless, if you add a frame of open brood, lots and lots of Varroa mites will dive in these cells because their urge is to reproduce. So when it's capped, the Varroa is sealed inside. So if you take that comb out, if you had a swarm, saying you put a frame of open brood in, and 3 days later it was all capped, you could then remove that frame. And that would mean lots of the Varroa had gone into the cells, and you would then be removing it when you removed it from the hive. Now, the MBU reckon this can catch more than 90% of the Varroa population just using that really simple thing. So you have to weigh that up. How useful is that to you? Well, I think as most colonies swarm, it could be really useful. It has 0 cost. And you can use that when there are supers on. If your bees are swarming, then it might be because they've gathered a super and a half full of honey, and they're going to take some of it away to a new hive, and you happen to intervene in the process. And a simple thing like adding some open brood and then removing it when it's sealed is a really effective way of dealing with Varroa. There's queen trapping, which we briefly touched on before, and this is detailed in the MBU Varroa leaflet at great length. But basically, you catch the queen, you put her in a cage, she can only lay on that cage, and then every 9 days she goes on to another one. But you take out capped frames, and so if it's done at the wrong time of year, it'll really weaken your colony. I think it's probably pretty stressful for a colony to have the queen caged. But this successive removal of capped frames is the idea. It will catch all the Varroa over a period of time. But that's 36 days you're then not having brood in that colony. And I think for most beekeepers, that's a bit of a stretch. Drone brood removal is really, really easy. And you can put 1 or 2 super frames in your brood box. I think MBU actually say 2, but that starts to feel quite decadent, because what you do is you wait till they've capped the drone brood they'll build at the bottom, because that's what they'll do if you give them the choice. And you remove it. So all the Varroa will go into this drone brood, because Varroa for preference would like drone brood. And then when you remove it, you're actually physically taking them out of the hive. And because it's on a super comb, the normal comb above would probably all be worker brood, so you leave that and you're just actually taking away the boys, and that can be really effective as well. Probably not 90% like the swarm and 1 frame of brood, but quite useful, and using a super as a deliberate way of allowing them to make drone broods, the most effective way, I think.
What do you do when you remove it, Dan? How do you just chuck it in the bin, or
you feed it your chickens?
I ain't got any chickens.
If you don't have chickens, you'd probably put it in the bin. It would be quite wet for melting down. It would have quite a lot of bits in it.
Goo.
Yeah. There are people who've put it on bird tables and things. But I don't know at the middle of summer how many birds come on the bird tables. That they might be interested in it. But I do know people just generally feed it the chickens.
Hedgehogs like them too.
Do they? Oh,
yes.
right.
Cool.
There you go.
So there's other things you can do with it.
No. You wouldn't want to put it anywhere else to hatch, because whatever you put it in to hatch would then have a lot of Varroa in, because it's deliberately caught a lot. Varroa prefer drone brood because it gives them a chance to make an extra new Varroa, because it's a longer sealed in process, and the cells are slightly bigger. But I can't think of a sensible use. You could melt it down if you were going to do it fairly soon, but if you just throw it in a bucket, it'll go really rank, because there'll be
Surely you don't want wax just hanging around on bird tables or hedgehog feeding, do you?
If it's got no honey in, it's probably not too bad. I know if you give it chickens, they absolutely stuff the faces with it. So there's none of this hanging around business. But yeah, I've not got a bird table anymore, because I could at one point take a picture of it every day and there would be a cat sat on it. So we stopped having a bird table because of the cat population locally. But it's yeah, you do have to think about the is it a good idea to leave it lying around? If it's got no honey in, it's probably a bit different. But you'd really want it eaten very quickly, I think. But I know chickens will absolutely snaffle it down. There's no problem with that. I have seen someone give them a comb that had a lot of drone brood on and had honey on. And to be honest, I did expect the chickens to get in a fight with bees, because I figured the bees would come and find it. But I think the chickens would at it quite quickly, even the honey stuff. But I wouldn't recommend putting anything with honey on anywhere. And then if there are bits of wax, then get it binned or into your wax bucket and melted down. If you leave the Varroa a bit longer, but as long as you take it out before day 24, then they are less gooey, and you could actually fork them out if you wanted, but it's a bit unpleasant. And that would actually give you the opportunity to count how much Varroa was in there. So if you've ever wanted to count Varroa out of drone brood, then that's possibly the time to do it. But then you're going to have to wash your hands and everything, because they're a bit sticky still, even when they're sort of day 21. But yeah, I don't know about the bird table thing. I've not done that, but I do have chickens, so I would probably give it them if I was going to do anything with it. Next on the list is just a very quick comparison from the MBU leaflet of the differences. Biotechnical methods are inexpensive or free, and can be combined with your summer management of bees. And the problems with it is they are time consuming, some of them, and need quite a lot of skill, the queen trapping one particularly, and might not be enough on their own. And if you don't do them right, or you overdo it, you might damage the colony, which again is the queen trapping, the idea of no new brood for 36 days. I think most colonies would be quite damaged by that. Using the authorised treatments, they are all tested, they are proved to be safe, they're convenient to use. Some of them are hideously expensive. I was going to do a price comparison, and I just thought, no, that's, they vary slightly in price at different retailers, but there's some that are only available at one place, and I decided not to do that. But some of them, the Apiguard, I think, is £5 a treatment, is it, something like that. But the risk of problems with the authorised treatments is this risk that if you don't use them right, you can kill your bees, and you can create resistance. The flumethrin ones, if you leave those on too long, they're really bad for your bees because Varroa get resistant to them. One of the fun things is they recommend swarm control for Varroa management, and that sort of comes in where we were talking right at the beginning of the biotechnical bit about putting in an open comb of brood, and that's your bait comb for your Varroa, and you remove that. And they reckon for your swarm control, put 2 open frames of brood in. That'll keep your colony there, but it'll catch all the Varroa. So that's definitely something you can look at if you'd like to cut down on the amount of chemicals you use. All this comes from the MBU leaflet, which I can link to later. And one of the things quite a number of you will already be using that helps with Varroa is the open mesh floor. They reckon about something like 25% of Varroa will fall through that hive floor and they can't get back up. So that's quite good. It's dead simple. Most hives come with an open mesh floor. And if you use that with other techniques, then you can help keep the numbers down. We can't eliminate Varroa, but we want to keep it at a level where our colony survives and thrives. And if our colony doesn't thrive, we don't get any honey. And if it doesn't survive, we need more bees. So it is something to consider. So that's the end of that. Someone said in the comments, we've got a bee gym. I don't know whether that's any good, but it sounds fun for the bees. It is. I always describe it, I always think of it as, if you've ever seen an Airfix model kit, when you've broke all the parts off, that funny shaped bit of plastic you get left, that's what a bee gym reminds me of. It's just got lots of little nooks and bits on for the bees to have a good itch against, and the idea is they'll use that to scratch themselves on. If bees felt itchy because of Varroa, I'm sure they'd itch themselves on bits in the hive rather than needing a specific thing for it. But some people do swear by it. And someone's just confirming, yeah, you put a super frame in your brood box, and the bees will draw comb underneath, and more than likely it will be drone brood, and they'll just fill it all with drone brood, and as soon as it's sealed you can take it out. And that's quite an effective way and useful if you want to count your Varroa levels as well. So are there any questions from anyone about Varroa treatments? I have got a list of all the leaflets that I'm going to post very shortly.
Diane?
Yeah.
The link I put there is for, it's like oxalic vape. You know, the gas torch, blowtorch things, like a little thing that fits on the end.
Yeah.
So that's another option for doing it.
Right, I'll add that to my page. I foolishly went back to the old style Facebook because I was trying to sort something out on one of the pages I manage over yesterday, and I couldn't see how to moderate on my mobile. It turns out I don't think you can anymore. So I will start posting the links to things. It was Minnie who had very kindly collated the list of documents in an Excel for me. So I will post all of those. If you want to read through them, you can. It's quite a long list of quite tedious things, but you can get them all from VMD. So I've just shared that on my Facebook page. So
what do you use?
I use Max and I have got apibioxol. I've never treated a swarm in the middle of summer with an oxalic acid drizzle, either any of the different options for that. But I think that might be what I do next year. When I do an artificial swarm, I'm going to take that colony that's mostly flying bees and I'm going to douse it in the right volume of oxalic acid solution, and see how that colony does. I just think that's such an opportunity to sort of deal with Varroa in the middle of the year. And it means, if you think about it, the shortage of max this year, you wouldn't have to worry about that. So I am going to give that a go next year, but normally it's a midwinter oxalic acid treatment, which is the apibioxol one. I have used Apiguard in the past, and I keep saying I'm going to use that in the autumn. So next year I might actually do swarm treatments and then the autumn thymol treatment. I don't like the idea of anything that stays in for 6, 9, 10 weeks though. I think they're just going into that point in winter where you're going to have to find a reasonably nice day to go and disturb the bees to take it out, and because you've got to take some of those treatments out or it creates resistance. You can really see why beekeepers have just forgotten, because you must get to the middle of November and think, oh, we've got to take that out of the hive, and you know, if it's raining solidly in November or it's really cold, you're not going to want to go in your bees to disturb them. So I imagine that's how the resistance has happened in the past.
Yeah, Diane, it's all about timing. I mean, I ordered Apiguard, and then I realised I needed to feed. So then I ordered Max because it was 7-day treatment.
Yeah.
Which meant after the treatment, I could feed in time before the end of October. It's kind of all worked out. It's been expensive, but at least I can use the Apiguard and it's not gone out of date. So I can use that next year. Yeah,
and that's it. If you've got balsam coming in, and this is why I haven't used the Apiguard for a few years, is because if you have a good crop of Apiguard coming in, you take your supers off to put your Apiguard on, you give them an eek, they are still bringing in so much honey, they are going to fill that eek with wax, and then at that point there's no queen excluder on there, and then what do? You leave an eek full of wax on over winter and deal with it in spring, because you don't want to be slicing comb off and damaging your queen. So you have to time things right, and if you've got balsam, then that does sort of, I think it more or less rules out Apiguard, which I think's a pity, because it's quite a good treatment. I think it's quite an effective one, and it is only 4 weeks.
One of our local talks the other night with Professor Steve Martin, who doesn't treat for Varroa.
No, go on.
And that was quite a controversial. It was really good. It was really good, but it's very interesting, his science about what's happening and things like that, and getting hold of these Varroa-resistant bees, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the end, somebody asked him and said, would you say that we could try it? And he was like, no, you have to pick the right bees.
Yes, if you want to read more about what he's working on, this BBKA special, the natural Varroa resistant honeybees, that's available and it's only £4. So if you want to read more, then that's something he's written for the BBKA. I did watch part of one of his talks, but I had to come to beach at night at 7 o'clock, so I could only listen to the first 20 odd minutes of it. But he's really good. He's done loads and loads of research. But this booklet talks about there are areas where in the UK where people don't treat and they have Varroa resistant bees. But he does say they're only Varroa resistant in those areas. And if you take them to an area with a lot of Varroa, they don't cope with it. which makes me think it's much more complex than there are just Varroa resistant bees.
Yeah,
I
he said.
thought Varroa was endemic.
Well, it sort of is everywhere, but I assume there are different levels of it. And if you've read anything by Tom Seeley in America, he thinks we have our hives too close together, and he's very much into the idea they should all be at least 500 meters apart. And it might be the stuff he talks about is bees having a smaller volume of space for brood because they're in trees, and they swarm more often, and that keeps their Varroa levels low, because as we've just talked about in a biotechnical method, swarming, you get bees leaving all the brood behind in a natural swarm. So the only Varroa on them is what's sat on them, and if there's open brood, they're going to be in there because they always want to reproduce. So swarming is good for keeping Varroa low on a natural bee population level. But it also might be if we put too many hives in an area, the drones can just flirt from hive to hive carrying Varroa like mad. And if you treat yours but the people down the road don't because they want Varroa resistant bees, then the drones from your hive might just take loads of Varroa down there, if you know, or their Varroa come to your colonies. And you know, it's much more complicated than just, oh, don't treat it, it'll be fine. Because one of the things that these people who do now not treat and have Varroa resistant bees, they might have lost 90% of their colonies for the first 5 years they did it, and they've built up really slowly again out of one colony maybe that survived that first year, and now they've got 20 colonies that are, you know, Varroa resistant. But it isn't really simple at all. It's quite a complex sort of
you know, when they said about children, school children, if they all wash their hair in a medicated shampoo at one night, that would be the end of egg lice until it was brought back in again.
Yeah.
Can you do that with bees? Everybody do it at the same time?
Good idea.
There's probably too many wild colonies to do that, isn't there?
Yeah, I understand the wild colonies.
There might be in some areas, but then the collective noun for beekeepers is an argument of beekeepers. So I imagine you could start with the very best of intentions.
Brexit. It'd be worse than Brexit.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is it. People are quite polarised on whether they treat or not. And there are some Facebook groups where you will get screamed at if you suggest treating for Varroa without having counted first. And you know that you will recognise those places as places to avoid, because unless you want to go and wind people up, I'm just going to go and treat for Varroa this week and I haven't counted, and just sit back with a big tub of popcorn and watch people get absolutely furious. It's wicked, but you know, I think it's called trolling, isn't it? I don't know.
I think education is key and knowledge is power. So just keep on with the teaching and the encouragement of learning. Yeah,
I mean, I think the need to know if your bees need treating is really useful. And that idea of putting a Varroa board under and monitoring it and seeing what's on that's really, really important. And it was only having put bees in quite a windy environment, I realised what a foolish thing that is not to oil a board. In the apiaries I had experience of up until then, none of them were very windy. When you go back to a hive after a week and you look on that inspection board and there's not a bit of wax on it at all, that's when you realise that location isn't good for bees, because that's so windy it's blown everything off the inspection board. And that very simple hint that somewhere is a very thin layer of oil on the board and things will stick to it. Makes it a bugger to clean, but yeah, that's well worth knowing that little hint. But yeah, if there are no more questions, then I am going to go and find my sofa and find a cup of tea and maybe a chocolate Freddo. So it's been lovely to see you all this evening. I will stay behind for 5 minutes if anyone wants to speak to me at the end. But otherwise, I will see you all Wednesday evening. As always, there is no obligation to, but I know some of you do. Thank you for those who do. You can find my link at buymeacoffee/DianeBees, I think it is. But thank you very much for being here. It's been a lovely evening, as always. I will see you again very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
Thanks,
Bye.
Diane. See you
Thanks,
later.
Diane.
Thank you very much.
Well,
Take care,
Good
everybody.
night.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Thanks,
Thank you.
Diane.